With the story, I'm now joined by Kabo Ramasia, an international journalist, on the rising incidents of journalists' detention, suppression of independent media outlets, and widespread dissemination of misinformation. Kabo, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. As an international journalist, how would you assess the state of press freedom around the world today? What would you say are the key challenges and threats that journalists face in carrying out their work in different regions and countries?
Okay. Thank you for having me, and a warm greetings to viewers at home. Let me just jump straight into it. I think the state of media freedom the world over, I think if we were to judge it looking at the Israel war, I think statistics show that over 100 journalists have died covering the Gaza war. And also with regards to the Ukraine war, I think a total of over 90 journalists were killed while they were covering that war as well. So that takes that to a total of almost 200 journalists who have lost their lives in the past year when they were covering the war. I think in so far as some regimes or some governments are concerned, I think that are really oppressive towards the media and they're putting laws that really make it very difficult for journalism to really practice their craft. For instance, there are some countries the world over which still do not have, a freedom of information bill whereby journalists could easily access public records, and it becomes very difficult for them to investigate stories or try to get to the bottom of the truth because they face hurdles when they're dealing with, government departments as and when they are really investigating such issues. And also, I think maybe the other challenge that may be posed to journalism, we always see a situation whereby in some instances journalists are harassed, they are detained, or they are threatened, or in actual fact the free speech is muzzled because maybe governments or regimes expect them to report or to write in a certain way which favors them, and when they don't, then maybe they're threatened and they're being surveilled on social media. We've had instances whereby some journalists, we've got secret services maybe listening on to their conversations as they're trying to follow stories with their sources and all that. So as the world was celebrating the World Press Freedom Day, and I think these are some of the issues that are really going forward. The safety of journalists, and I think this is what governments and non-government actors, being the civil society, should concern itself with.
Right. I mean, you make mention of the Israel and Gaza conflict, the Ukraine and Russia conflict. We know that there's conflict in places like Sudan. We saw when Eritrea was also in conflict, there was a lot of no freedom for journalists in those areas. Which countries could we benchmark against? Which countries could we look up to with regards to giving journalists and press that freedom?
Well, I would say here I'm in Botswana, and Botswana has been for the longest time regarded as a beacon of good governance and democracy. I think even though we have our challenges here, where we have got instances where journalists are sometimes harassed, where they are sometimes detained for following certain stories, I think countries like Botswana, maybe these are countries whereby people maybe could benchmark from, because we have never really had instances whereby maybe journalists are killed while they're in pursuit of their duties. And I think the rankings that were released, I don't know whether it was late last year, we really fared well in terms of media freedom. And I'm not saying that we have arrived, because there are really a number of challenges that needs to be overcome. And also maybe as a benchmark of maybe what not to do, I think we saw a few years back in when Eswatini was banning and how not to treat journalists. I think we have seen also instances in Lesotho where journalists were really not treated well. I think also there have been countries like Zim where journalists could not freely report on whatever issues that they wanted to report on, because they were afraid of being arrested or being harassed and all that. But the bottom line is, as we celebrate World Press Freedom Day, I think 31 years later, the world should do better, because 31 years later, I think our democracies should see to it that they cater for the freedom of the media, so that the media could execute its watchdog role efficiently and effective, because there's no society that can exist without the media.
Of course. What role do you think international organizations such as the United Nations or the press freedom advocacy groups play in protecting and promoting press freedom globally?
Yeah, I think like you are rightfully mentioning, there are entities like the United Nations, your entities like UNESCO, because if you look at the World Press Freedom Day, and you look at institutions like MISA, the Media Institute of Southern Africa, that are really have been for the longest time been supported by UNESCO to really commemorate the significance of this freedom of expression. And I think entities should really come on board to really speak against regimes that are oppressive towards the media. I think, and also non-government entities with funding should also come on board to really try to capacitate the media, so that this issue of independence or media independence in democracies could be strengthened and further advanced or protected. Because the reason why we are seeing instances whereby maybe democracies may be shrinking in some instances, maybe because of the media revenue, whereby now some media houses no longer feel the need to be independent, because once they become independent, they become chargers and advertisers start pulling out and all sort of things. So they now become a bit lenient towards maybe regimes, maybe a bit lenient towards the corporate world, even though they should be actually holding them to account.
With that said, what role do you think social media has played in changing the perception in terms of the dissemination of information, how people are receiving information more freely and in its most rawest form? We're seeing now with Israel and Gaza and how videos are coming out of those regions where we are actually seeing what's happening as opposed to the filtered information that's coming to people. How do you think social media has really changed that landscape?
That's a good one. I think social media, there are really the good and the bad that has been brought by social media. The good side of social media has been that news can be, disseminated timely and as and when it happens, as opposed to the olden ways of having to wait for a journalist to go from a press conference and go back to the office and write. By the time they write the story on Friday, it long happened on Monday. So with social media and digital media, I think we can instantly report on that. But also the downside of it has been issues of misinformation and disinformation that the world seems to be grappling with. So, especially in instances whereby countries like Botswana, South Africa, and a lot more the world over are going to elections, and these issues of deep fakes and misinformation and disinformation, they are more pronounced, particularly through what we call political propaganda in instances of elections. And also, as we are commemorating this year's World Press Freedom Day, the focus was on the environment, how the media should try to report on environmental issues to see to it that we navigate through this crisis that we find ourselves in. But also, there's misinformation that is being peddled on social media, on this digital media. AI has also brought in an aspect whereby information can be manipulated. And when you deal with media, I think it is high time that editors and publishers emphasize the need for journalists to back up their stories with data or with scientific or empirical evidence, because otherwise it would be misled by whatever that is being spread on social media, because there is always that urge for people to break news on social media, even without having to ascertain or verify the facts.
Most certainly. I mean, quite often when we have this conversation, we implore advocacy groups, journalists themselves, as well as media organizations to be at the forefront in ensuring that press freedom exists. What role does the public have in the free flow of true information?
I think, the public really should inform itself on what is at stake if they peddle misinformation. Because at the end of the day, I think the fact that we are all most of us are on social media and maybe have got access to data, it doesn't make us journalists. I understand that there's a phenomenon called citizen journalists, whereby everybody can just tweet something or just put up a WhatsApp status or a Facebook post, then they are regarded as journalists. But let us allow for the trained journalists to really do the work, and also let us inform ourselves as the public on what really media entails, because I think this issue of fake news and misinformation and disinformation, is really a big challenge in terms of the media space in the 21st century. And it has really reversed a lot of gains that were made by mainstream media from way back.
Most certainly. Kabo, thank you so much for your time. A very happy World Media Freedom Day to you and for your inputs that you've given us tonight. That was Kabo Ramasia, an international journalist, speaking to us there about what we need to do more as a society with regards to ensuring that our information that is disseminated by our media is true and fair.